Namaskaram. Ellorukkum Vanakkam. The little bit of Tamil DNA in me had to express itself. After this wonderful lived experience that's been demonstrated by Paul and Joseph on stage, I'm only a cheap plagiarist standing in front of you. All that I have is a lesson for all of us out there who are not true indigenous people. Try as we might never become one, but at least we can become good imitators of one. And that's a story I would like to bring to all of you today. It's very easy to have these conferences. In fact, G20 is a fascinating conference circuit now. And I've also become a victim of that circuit. And I would honestly say that this is possibly the best G20 event that I have attended amongst the last 7 or 8. And my definition of best is not because of the extraordinary hospitality, the wonderful warmth that is shown here, but also because of the intellectual treat that all of us have been enjoying from yesterday. The first time I've been listening to speeches without falling asleep. And so I must thank you for inviting the right people. And I hope to keep you awake for some time too. I have no PowerPoint. Somebody came and asked me, do you have a PowerPoint? I said, I hope to make a couple of powerful points if I can, and then stop my speech. I go back to the plagiarism I spoke about. Many decades ago, as an young doctor graduating in medicine, possibly believing arrogantly that I'll be the next Albert Schweitzer that India can boast of, went away into this forest and had the privilege of living close to 30 years with the people whom I would wish to go back to. And mark my words, comparing the life I lived to the last 2 years in Delhi, you will understand why I want to go back, running back to the people I've left. I remember Chinmaya, somebody like Paul, an elderly, extraordinary human being who possibly mentored me into the indigenous community ways. Fortunately or unfortunately, the forest I lived in had 4 different ethnic tribal groups, which in our understanding of anthropology will classify them and separate them and fragment them, without understanding that you can never fragment indigenous thinking. You can only name them, but you can never fragment them in their thinking. But that's the anthropological residue that we have of modern science. With all my thinking, and these are people who are affected by declaring the forest, their loved forest, as national park because we want a national park, built 4 dams around their homes and submerged it, and then tell them, fend for yourself. I would tell much later, Harshji is here and he'll understand me fully, we were experts for 6 to 7 decades creating poverty in an indigenous community, and then we won't have a ministry to take care of their poverty. That's a fascinating ridicule of how human development has been progressing. And in the understanding of all this, we think we know more. What do they know? They are poor people. We'll have to tell them, we'll have to prescribe. And it is the same educational system that I was a product of. And when I went, I thought, these poor tribals, they need my health care. They need my medicine. And built hospitals and schools and colleges and a whole range of things that we all do in the outside, very narrow understanding of tribals, or Janjatis as I would like to call them. Chinmaya was the most sensible of him. And I thought, education is done, health is done, but still people are not improving, in my understanding of improving, because we have the scale called economics or econometrics to measure progress. And I was a victim of that thinking. And so I decided that our indigenous communities should learn agriculture. Without realizing, for centuries, my indigenous communities had their own agriculture. They would have a bamboo stick which they would sharpen, make a hole, drop a few ragi seeds, and what little ragi grew, they would eat it. And I said, how wasteful can you be? You must plow the land. You must use a seed distributor, and then you will get so many. You are hardly getting a quintal of ragi. Now I can teach you to get 16 quintals of ragi. And Chinmaya laughed, and he didn't stop me. That's the beauty of indigenous wisdom. They want you to experience, not to learn it from their imitations. And I did make them grow the ragi the way I wanted it to grow. And then Kempaiah said, you know why I didn't stop you? Because you will see what happens when the harvest is ready for cutting. And true to Kempaiah's wisdom, without recognizing, I lived in the world's largest elephant corridor. We have 6,000 elephants in that stretch between Mudumalai and Nagarhole. And the extra 15 quintals of ragi went to these animals. But Kempaiah was not worried. He said, you know, after all, you did some good. At least elephants have got the ragi. But I was desperate to prove that Kempaiah is wrong, so I decided and spoke to my agriculture university friends, and they said, you should grow cabbages, because elephants don't know cabbage. They know bananas, they know jackfruit, they know everything your forest can give. But cabbage is, in the tribal language, it is a Videshi vegetable. It is not local. So I thought I've cracked the code. I can now cheat the elephants. So I went back and told Kempaiah, I'm going to show you that I'm better. And we grew cabbages. And true to my agriculture university's friends' knowledge, we grew close to 6 or 7 tons of cabbages. And neither elephants nor wild boars figured out what it was the first year. And Kempaiah told me, first year they'll not figure out. Second year you will know about it. But first year is what I was interested to prove my point, and then loaded them in a truck. It was fascinating for me, and you know, we should understand, we are forcing the concept of oneness in the world which has got an economic model of separation. And it's so stupid. Every time I attend these conferences, I actually get angry, but I still come to speak, because that's a place where I can share my anger and show how foolish all of us are. We have an economic model which can never understand Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We have an economic model which can never understand one earth, one family, one future, because we always thrive on separation. Advaita is for all books that we can sell outside, but not as a lived experience for all of us inside. That's the beauty of the way the world has emerged, because we all subscribe to the Western narrative of economic growth. And Kempaiah is different. Unfortunately, he's a vanishing tribe. He's passed away 10, 12 years ago. Now, we grew cabbages and took it to the markets, because that's where you can sell 6 tons of cabbages. When Kempaiah grew 1 quintal of ragi, his family was sufficiently consuming it. But when you grow 6 tons, you have to enter into the monetized mechanism of the world markets. So we took it to the market, APMC yards. And these yards have their own theory of change. The cabbage fellow will only buy cabbages. The potato fellow will only buy potatoes. The onion fellow will only buy onions. And you will have to pay the price that he asks. He's a monopolist, and you have no choice. The previous day, to try it out, I went and bought cabbages. It was 6 rupees a kg in the market those days. Very high. I thought, wow, we have hit a gold mine now. My tribals are going to be having so much money. And the marketeer, the APMC yard agent, offered me 30 paise a kg. I was disappointed, and I asked my tribal friends who had come with me, what do we do? I said, let's do what I have seen farmers do. Let's dump it on the streets of Mysore and allow vehicles to go over it, prove a point, and go back. The anger in me at that age. And my tribals, that is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, said, we have anyway grown it. I'm sure you are from Mysore. You will know all the anath ashrams and vruddashrams here. Let's give it and go away. The story doesn't end here, my friends. We sold it at 30 paise. We just managed to meet the hiring charges of the lorry and the diesel price, because somebody gave us free lorry, but diesel we put. That's all we could afford. We went back, completely disappointed at this failure of mine. I was sitting in the evening wondering what to do. Kempaiah walks in. Typically, he was very much looking like Paul, and a knotted bun on his head with beetle pan flowing by his mouth. And he came and put his hand on me and said, don't feel bad. Then I said, how do I not feel bad? I thought that I have solved the economic problems of our communities. We can grow cabbages. And what Kempaiah told me is that oneness, that spirit of oneness, everyone in this room should possibly live back with. His answer to me was, the problem is you saw money in the cabbage that you grow. But I think you were still a success, because I saw God manifest in the way the cabbage grew. He said, where else can you have this experience of throwing a seed and seeing life come? Life which you are not in control of, but believe you are. Cabbage that you don't own, but you think you own. And that comes because my mother is kind enough to give it to you. And that itself is enough for you to have learned, grow through this experience. What he taught me that day is true reverence. If, my friends, we want to talk reverence, we have to live the reverence. There is no other way. You can pretend the reverence. You can go to 1,000 temples and prostrate. You can meet 100 monks and go do namaskaram to them. But that is not the true reverence. Reverence is that oneness Chinmaya showed, oneness with the earth, oneness with the cabbage, oneness with the fool like me, and oneness with the marketeer whom he was refused to get angry with. If we can live that experience, we have understood Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And this knowledge can only come from our indigenous communities, because that is where wisdom is still embedded. We think wisdom is embedded at universities. I teach at Cornell. I keep telling my students, wisdom is not embedded there. Information is embedded in plenty. I've written quite a few books communicating not my knowledge, but the wisdom I have gained from these people. Whether it is wisdom of the life that you can live by oneness, or the wisdom that you gain by losing that oneness. That's also wisdom. Only when you lose something precious can you understand what you have lost. And it is these communities who have taught me that extraordinary space where nothing exists and everything actually exists. And that's the beauty, where they don't call it the Bhagavad Gita. They don't call it any Upanishads. But the beauty is, if you're observant enough, if you do your ethnographic studies very sincerely and completely one with them, then you understand the best way to learn from them is to live with them. And I'm glad for the first time in our G20 conferences, we actually have extraordinary people from the indigenous communities sitting here sharing their wisdom, because it is time that voices are heard. It is time for the next generation to understand there will be no more generations. Paul spoke about grandmothers, but I think if you want our grandchildren's grandchildren, we better listen to them. Because that is the way this world is going to go progress. And if we have to do that, I think the time has come for us to think of something more radical, more practical, and talk of the life economy that we are all refusing to recognize. The Honorable Prime Minister has given a call, I think a very intelligent call, a very emotional call, far deeper than the way the Western world can figure it out. It is unnerving because their models don't even understand that. To me, taking that personalized responsibility, I remember what Swami Vivekananda so beautifully said, you cannot learn chemistry by simply doing japa, saying chemistry, 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 chemistry. You will not learn it. He said, get into the lab, burn your fingers, break a few test tubes, and then possibly some chemistry might be learned. I think it's time for India, as that world leader whose moment has come, to stand up and say that if you really want to understand sustainability, first learn to live sustainable. Learn to think sustainability. Learn to live that moderation that our Gita talks about in every sense of the word. And if we can learn that from our indigenous communities, I think we have a lot to share and give for each other. And so finally, what I would like to give, I love the way Shantanuji forced us to participate. It's very nice. We all love the technology and we all clicked and said, these are two things I'm going to give up when I go home. And I can tell you, we are all in the rubber band world. He pulled the rubber band, it will go back to its original equilibrium and we'll go back to our lives as usual. So if you truly believe in this conference today, make up your minds and write down in your books in front of you. Two things I'm going to learn from my indigenous friends and I'm going to be different from today. Two things, I'm going to continue to be the way I am, because some things that you do might actually be brilliant too. Let's not believe that a change is about change. Change is about learning what to preserve also. And what to preserve is that wonderful civilizational description that the previous session, whether it is Ms. Anandi or Ananda ji or every one of you gave us, so much to preserve. I was just thinking about it and I said, I normally don't write. It's been a long time since I've written, and I actually wrote 3 pages from the previous session itself. And I should say, let's promise ourselves today, 2 things I will be the way I am, 2 things I'll change, and 2 things I will stop doing from today, in the spirit of the oneness that we're talking about. And in conclusion, I want to continue Kempaya's story and stop with that. Tribals they never owned personal land. It's always jammas. They would say from that hill to this valley. And we in the government went and told them, your title deed, your 2 acres, your 1 acre. And then we taught them individualism. And in that spirit, when agriculture happens, Kempaya would give seeds to his fellow men. He would give ragi to somebody, paddy to somebody else, pulses to somebody else, and no seeds to somebody else. And when I asked him, in my own economic world, I said, how can you let land be fallow? In our country, those days, we had challenges for food. I said, how stupid of you. How can you let land be fallow? And he told me, you will never understand. Come back after 6 months. Agriculture happened, 6 months, and they can only cultivate what seeds he gives. 6 months later when I went, there's a central place called Chavdi, small hut, where he sits in judgment. And then the fellow, one family, Mada will come and say, I grew 8 quintals of ragi. And he will say, you only need 1 quintal. The 7, keep it here. So he would redistribute, and look at the redistributive economy, and we need to understand that. He would give everybody what they needed for the next 1 year, and there would be surplus left. And for 5 years, I was in Karnataka as a special investigator of the Lokayukta. So we only are trained to see evil, right? And I thought immediately, Kempaya is now keeping back 10 quintals of ragi. He's going to take it to his house, like all our today's political class does. And Kempaya smiled at me and said, I know what you're thinking. That was for community events, for the jatres, for the festivals. And if somebody felt sick and the father of the family couldn't go out to work, ragi would go from here. The story didn't stop here. Kempaya, I told him, you left land fallow, how can you waste it? He said, what you see is fallow land because you're trained like that. What I see is land healing itself. I see the weeds, I see the insects, I see the termites, and they're all mine. And God has given me the responsibility of protecting and taking care of them. The day we human beings understand that, then we are one family. Namaste.